Before I begin the sermon, a word about attendance this morning. I can account for, 3 people came back from Dogwood Acres. I account for 27 of people who aren't here. So if someone next week tells you they were at Dogwood Acres, you better check it out, because it might not be so. To say that the book of Esther, from which Sabrina read so well, presents a bit of a problem for Christian preachers is about like saying the Confederate battle flag presents a bit of a problem for Southerners. It's one of those artifacts that stays in the closet most of the time. It belongs to us, all right, but we are not eager to run it up the pole so that everybody can see it. Esther is a member of the family. Her name is in the family Bible, but it's in that section where you're most likely to find pressed flowers from weddings or bulletins from the funeral of distant cousins. The truth is, the book of Esther has always been a kind of embarrassment. It doesn't say anything about God, our loving neighbor. In fact, it doesn't mention God at all. The Persian king Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes I, appears no less than 190 times in the text, but the God of Israel does not even get a footnote. There is no mention of law or covenant. The plot reads like a tale from Arabian Nights, and it's about as morally uplifting as last week's hearings of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Rabbis had problems with Esther before Christian preachers ever did. By the time Esther appears in the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Hebrew Scriptures, it has been heavily rewritten to make it sound more like something that might be appropriate for pulpit or bema. I heard a lot of stories in my youth growing up in Sunday school. David and Goliath, Daniel in the lion's den, Jesus at the wedding of Cana. A lot of stories. But I don't remember a single flannel graph of Haman hanging from his own gallows. Believe me, I would have remembered that. So since the story might not be familiar to all of us, let me give you the Cliff Notes version. The tale is set in Persia during the reign of Xerxes I. The people of Israel have been living in exile for a long time, and they are well established. One might even say almost assimilated. A Jew named Mordecai lives in the royal city. He conducts business in the royal gate and has a beautiful cousin named Hadassah. Hadassah is her Hebrew name, of course. Her Greek name is Esther. Esther is an orphan, and Mordecai has adopted her as his own daughter. As the story opens, King Xerxes is in the market for a new queen. The former queen, a woman named Vashti, lost her job because she refused to appear before the king and his drunken banquet guests on the 7th night of a 7th-night bender. Vashti's act of defiance struck fear in the hearts of all the men in the kingdom and prompted the king to issue an edict squashing all forms of women's liberation. It didn't work, of course, but we'll get to that in a minute. The point is, Xerxes #1 needs a queen #1, so he sponsors a kind of beauty pageant to find her. Did I mention what a looker Esther is? Oh, she's fair and beautiful, and Mordecai is sure that if she does join the king's harem, she will become numero una wife. So Mordecai sends Hadassah off to the king's talent scouts with these 2 little bits of advice. Stick to that name Esther and be sure not to let anybody know that you are a Jew. Well, the plan works. Esther knocks the king right off his feet, and she becomes Queen Esther, the fairest of the fair. A little after her promotion, Mordecai learns of a plot to assassinate her husband, the king. He tells Esther, and Esther tells Xerxes, and both of the conspirators end up on the gallows, leaving the king indebted to Mordecai and all the more a fan of his queen, Esther. Enter the villain. If you were in a synagogue hearing this story, you would say boo and hiss. A certain man named Haman is a high muckety-muck in the royal administration, and in the manner of many an Oriental bureaucrat and not a few office holders today, Haman is both vain and entirely without scruples. He likes nothing better than to have people bow and scrape before him. One day he goes to the royal gate, and everybody bows and scrapes before him except one man, and that man is Mordecai. Haman is so angry he wants to lay hands on Mordecai right away, but he has a second thought. It's beneath the dignity of a person of my standing to lay hands on someone so insignificant as this. Haman decides, I will bide my time, and I will figure out a way to rub him out, him and all of his kinfolk. So Haman does a little snooping, discovers that Mordecai is a Jew. Then he starts a smear campaign. He tells the king that all the Jews are bad news. They don't obey the king's edicts. They keep to themselves and observe their own laws. They might even be terrorists. All the Jews need to be rounded up and killed, Haman tells the king, every one of them, man, woman, and child. The king agrees and delegates Haman to do the dirty work. Haman sends out a decree in the king's name. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, all the Jews in the empire are to be killed. Things are looking bad at this point for Esther and her relatives. Mordecai secures a copy of Haman's murderous decree and smuggles it into Esther in the royal harem. But what can Esther do? If she reveals herself to be a Jew, she will come under the murderous edict. If she remains silent, her people will be killed. So Mordecai sends a message to Esther. Now is not the time to be silent. Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Queen Esther rises to the occasion. She asks Mordecai to organize all the Jews in the empire to pray for her. Then she puts on her best dress and her high heels or whatever it is that gets the king's attention, and she wraps that big, bad Oriental potentate around her little finger. She has him cooing, "What would you like, my dear? Anything you like, up to half of my kingdom." "Oh, shucks," she says, "just come to dinner tomorrow night. It'll just be you and Haman and little old me." "Is that all?" "Oh, of course. Haman and I will be there with bells on." That very night, King Haman has a bad case of insomnia. He tries counting sheep, but then he resorts to a surefire remedy. He calls for the royal historian to read to him from the royal annals, the book of records. Ever read the Congressional Journal? Imagine how soporific it would be in ancient Arabic. The king is just about to doze off when he comes to that part where Mordecai foiled the plot to assassinate him. Remind me, royal historian, what did we do to show our gratitude to Mordecai? Oh, nothing, sire, says the royal historian. Summon one of my muckety-mucks. I must attend to this matter right away. It so happens that Haman is standing outside the door, waiting to ask the king about hanging Mordecai on his especially high gallows, which he has just built. Oh, Haman, says the king, glad you're here. What is it we might do to honor someone who does me a favor? Oh, well, sire, you could give him some of the royal robes that you have worn, and you could give him a horse that you have ridden on, and maybe one of your spare crowns, and you could get some low muckety-muck to go ahead of him and shout, "This is how the king honor those whom he favors." That's a great idea, says the king. You take care of that, Mordecai. You be the guy who goes ahead and does the shouting. Oh, well, sire, that's hardly a kind of job for a person in my rank and position. I'd like to see it done right, I'd like to see it done right, Haman, so you do it. Of course, sire, of course. Now, what is the name of this outstanding citizen? Mordecai. Mordecai? Yeah, Mordecai, the Jew. He's in the king's gate every day. You probably know him. Right. So Haman has to give the robes and the horse and the crown and go ahead in the streets with Mordecai riding on the horse saying, "This is how the king honors people who please him." It is not Haman's day, and it's about to get worse. That very night, he goes to the banquet prepared by Queen Esther. It must have been some spread, because yet again the king says to Esther, "What would you like, my dear? Up to half my kingdom." "Well, sire, I'm not sure you're aware of this, but a certain muckety-muck in your court has decreed that all of my kinsfolk should be killed. So I'd like my life, please, and also the lives of my kin." Then Xerxes says to Queen Esther, "Who has done this terrible thing? Who has presumed to do this?" And she says, "He's sitting right there, a foe and an enemy, that wicked Haman." Perhaps you can guess the rest. Haman ends up hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Whoa, now that is some story, is it not? And I left out a lot of the good stuff. If it sounds to you like a tall tale, like something from Paul Bunyan or Brer Rabbit, well, that's because that's what it is. It's a Jewish tall tale. Not particularly uplifting, but a lot of fun to tell at the Jewish festival of Purim, a minor festival where everybody gets dressed up and has a lot of fun hearing the story. Purim is celebrated on the 13th day of Adar in the Jewish calendar, which usually falls in the month of March, the very day when Haman's decree was supposed to have taken effect. We Christians don't read much from the book of Esther. It comes round in the lectionary every 3 years. It often gets displaced by more sober, more uplifting passages. But this morning, it seems to me that Esther has arrived just in the nick of time. Just in time to celebrate the courage of women who, despite how the cards are stacked against them, rise to the occasion, just in time to point out the folly of men in high places who say they appreciate women but react with horror when women insist on speaking in their own voices. Esther is not an historical figure, but she reminds me of women today who have the temerity to speak the truth to power. Vashti was not an historical figure, but she reminds me of women who refuse to put up with a double standard that assumes that boys will be boys and girls will keep their mouths shut and not rock the boat. Haman was not an historical figure, but he bears a striking resemblance to certain men today, men who grew up in privilege and now walk the halls of power, men who are quick to tout their own virtue and bristle at the suggestion that they might be wrong about themselves. The book of Esther might seem far-fetched, a little bit of reality TV, but read through the lens of headlines this week, it comes closer to genuine reality than we'd like to admit. It is the custom during the festival of Purim for the congregation to boo Haman and to cheer Esther whenever their names appear in the story. The cheers are the loudest when Haman is hanged by his own gallows. Those gallows are built with the lumber of narcissistic pride and misogynist presumption. Let us pray that the Hamans of today will repent and change their ways, lest they suffer a similar demise. Amen.